Hello, and welcome to Rejects, the podcast where we talk about all the beautiful things that might have been, but sadly are not. We discuss screenplays, pilots, art. We talk to comedians, artists, writers who have created wonderful, wonderful things that sadly never got made. And with us today is a hilarious comedian and producer. His monthly, I should have spoken to them. Okay, his monthly show, Stupid Fancy, combines the worlds of high art and stand-up comedy. It really is a beautiful thing. Everyone, welcome Andrew Lizotte.
Hello. I'm happy to be here. I'm sad that I have so much I could talk to you about with the rejection.
Listen, this didn't even need to be an interview podcast. It just could have been me going through all of my various things. And I would have had so many episodes, years and years worth of episodes of just me being like, and here's the thing that got rejected on this day.
This is why you're wrong, the podcast. How dare you, the podcast, the audiobook.
Have you, like everyone else, been watching Squid Game?
I haven't yet because, and this is a terrible thing about me, I assume that if everyone likes it, it's going to be bad.
But the reason that I mention Squid Game is I only started watching it because, like you, I felt, oh, everyone likes it, so it must be terrible. Look at us two contrarians. But I started watching it because the guy who wrote, directed, produced it, Korean fellow, he had shopped that around for 10 years before it finally got made, before someone finally picked it up. And I was like, a soulmate.
Yeah, exactly. You hear about those.
It is so nice to hear. I think that The Queen's Gambit was another one where he was shopping it around and taking it places, and then everyone was like, no. And then it finally got made, and then it became a hit. So I watched
Jojo Rabbit, which is a movie, not a show, but he was workshopping that around forever. They're just like, we didn't want Hitler to be a comedic character.
Which is funny to me that people would say that, because The Great Dictator consistently comes up in like top 100 comedy films of all time, top 10 movies of all time. There's such a precedent for Hitler as a comedic character.
Well, and I mean, Mel Brooks has just made his entire career off of making fun of Hitler.
It's very funny to me how producers' minds work. And maybe this is why I'll never get anything made, because to me, the mindset is so alien. Or it's like, what do they think is going to be successful? What do they think is not going to be successful? And how can you say?
Yeah, there's. I find that there's two warning signs. They're either they're too encouraging of like, it'll be fine, we'll fix it in post, or the other nail in the coffin that I have experienced is if the producers don't get the jokes. And you need to kind of go like, no, this has a rhythm to it. As soon as you have to do that, I'm like, and this is never getting made.
Yeah. There's a rhythm to it, or, hey, this appeals to a group of people who are not represented in the room.
This wasn't my pilot. I was helping out with someone else's pilot. It was nice actually, because that person is British and I had an excuse to already like go to Europe, and then they were just like, hey, if you're here, just be a background character. It was kind of like an Office style mockumentary thing, so they did a little like interview thing with me and my comedy partner, and the producers didn't realize who we were, and so when they were interviewing us, we were improvising jokes, and there was an entire like crowd of people who were background extras that were supposed to be at a concert, and we were talking and I could get the crowd laughing, but the producers and the camera guy were so confused. They didn't know that we were kidding the whole time, and I was just like, this is going to be unfortunate later if they don't understand why people are laughing right now. And it was stupid too, because basically what happened was somebody threw like an impromptu concert or festival, and they were interviewing us about like, what did you think of the festival? I'm like, and I think I said something like, it's great. I've only recently gotten into music. I've only listened to 3 bands. Everybody's telling me to get into the Beatles. So I think that's going to be. And they did not know I was kidding. Like, I was being subtle in tone, but it was a very broad, dumb joke.
Mm-hmm.
Nothing. They had no idea. And that's kind of what I mean of like, that's another first sign that something is going terribly wrong.
Yeah, it sounds like maybe the producers and the creatives were not on the same page with that one, so that would explain maybe the pilot not getting made.
Right? And sometimes they're just looking for the type of content that you're willing to offer. Like, it checks a certain number of boxes, and they didn't really look at the product.
Oh, yeah. I can't count the amount. I mean, I can, because every time it's ended in heartbreak. But many times I've been brought in by someone because they're like, oh, she checks a bunch of ethnicity boxes for us. And she's a woman under 40, so we can still see her. So let's bring her in and see what she has to offer. And then come in, and I inevitably do not do an accent. I don't do accents unless they're like, I mean, I can do goofy like English Australian accents for the sake of comedy. But when they're like, imitate your dad, do an Indian accent. Yeah. And I'm like, okay, if I imitate my dad's accent, you will get like a very posh, like Asian, went to school at international British schools, slight British accent. That's not the kind of Asian accent they want. They're like, no, we want a goofy Asian accent that we can laugh at. We don't want an Asian accent that's smarter than us.
Which
is not to say that normal Asian accents aren't quote unquote smarter than, but I think you can kind of tell what I'm getting at. Where
no, exactly. It's like that anyone with a British accent is either smarter, but is kind of like not masculine, or smart and evil.
Yeah.
That kind of a thing. Whereas like the first thing I ever got called in for, it was because I was Métis. They needed more people in that box. But then when I got in the room, we're not visually recording, but I'm very white looking. Yeah. Like, you wouldn't know it to just look at me. And
but I mean, most Métis people look white, and I say this with a little asterisk because I feel like,
well, that's the point.
The first time I saw you, I don't know if you remember when we met, but I do, because I was so excited, and I was like, "Are you Métis as well?" Because my mother is Métis. I knew it. I knew it from your last name, which is Lizotte. Mm-hmm. I grew up with a bunch of Lizottes, but also because to me you look Métis.
I'll take it.
Kind of tell. And I find
which is the first time anyone has ever asked me that without me prompting the information first. So that freaked me out in a weird way.
And I find that a lot of times when you meet people who are Indigenous, especially who are like mixed Indigenous, you can tell, but other people can't. It's like a secret visual code that we have where it's like we can pick each other out, but other people can't. Everyone else just thinks that we're white.
Yeah, it's funny to me how many people think I'm Jewish, except if you ask a Jewish person that. I've never had a Jewish person think I was Jewish.
Just because you have curly hair?
Curly hair, and this is also the Métis thing, is you get the higher cheekbones and the broader nose. Mm-hmm. So it's just the same thing in the opposite direction.
All right, so let's we've gone off topic, which I'm not surprised about. So let's dive into the work, so to speak, and let's get the elevator pitch of your show/movie/book/theatrical production. Feel free to stop me at any point with clarification about what it is that you've brought us today.
I suppose, well, most of them would be TV pilots. That's just where I've always been able to get my foot in the door the most. Do you want the one that I think would be the most commercially successful, or do you want the one that I like that no one will ever make?
Oh, the one that you like that no one will ever make.
Oh, okay. I'll just alienate the hell out of everyone. So first of all, I have to say I am terrible at the elevator pitch. I usually, the only time anything that I do gets made is just because, like, I just ignore the pitch. Here's a script, and I shove it in their hands. And I wrote this in a pilot class. Okay. And then at the end of this, my teacher was just like, this is funny, and it's technically a comedy, but it's more like an HBO comedy, and I expected you to write like a comedy. And I'm like,
Okay,
I like HBO.
that's a big compliment. I feel like you sneaking that in there is a real sneaky brag.
See, but that's him telling me like this won't get made.
Mm.
This is the like, where are you going to pitch this in Canada? Basically, the whole idea is a guy is forced to go back home to his small town, which very done premise, but he
Where he
goes
discovers
back.
the meaning of Christmas. Yep.
Exactly. He discovers that what he needed, he left behind long ago. No, he goes back and discovers that his small town has actually become an end times cult.
I love that.
Yeah.
I want to watch it.
Thank you. You're the one. You're the one person. And so
I have so many follow-up questions. I want to watch this show. Okay. So
it was basically like Corner Gas meets the apocalypse.
How would the CBC not jump at that? They're a bunch of fools.
They're wrong. Yeah, exactly.
And I say that, I mean, I'm saying that because you're my friend and I like you and I want you to like me because I'm a people pleaser, which is why I'm a comedian. But I'm also saying that because I genuinely am hooked. You say you're bad at elevator pitches, but you have me hook, line, and sinker. So who would your target audience be for this? I'm assuming not a kids show, but maybe.
I think it would be, if I could compare it to other shows. Do you ever watch Rami?
Sadly, I have not watched Rami.
Okay. So I only bring it up because it's very good at the dichotomy of people that were raised religious, didn't hate all of it, but are now trying to live in the secular world, and how do you reconcile those things? And that's
really
something I've struggled with my whole life. But like, I feel like most people would say something like, "Oh, I'm a lapsed Catholic." Like, we still all know the steps.
Yeah. I mean,
you know
again,
what I mean?
Fellow Métis person here. I feel like Catholicism is an extra tricky one there because then you have a strange mix of Catholicism and an indigenous identity, which don't mix great.
Oh, and like I really tend to lean more towards Buddhism. My mother's side of the family was Protestant. My dad's side is Catholic. I was raised in a Jewish neighborhood. So I got a little bit of all of it. So it was a big thing for me growing up, trying to figure out, well, what's the right one? Because everybody tells me my soul is dependent on it and no one agrees with each other. And yet it's not. It's the most important thing, but no one actually focuses on it.
Yeah.
It's very confusing as a child.
Thing, but they're like, but I'll think about that down the road.
And one of the
compartmentalize it to this one day of the week, and then the rest of,
Yeah. And then like 2 minutes before I clock out, like in a panic of tears in a hospital bed.
Oh, yikes. Very okay. So now we're veering a little bit more grim, which maybe is it what you want in a popular comedy? Possibly.
You know what? I would rather it was dark subject matter with a positive outlook.
I like that.
And the reason I would say, the other reason I thought this was never going to get made is because I did a play once and it did very well. But the reviews were so mixed because what it was is I made a almost like sketch comedy story that was 3 stories that intertwined and broke apart that basically explained how Christianity survived and became a business because it was actually like the least popular religion at a point because it's the only religion that has deicide, where everybody essentially knows Jesus died. Like there's no other religion that's coming back from your God's dead, but this is still a thing somehow. It shouldn't have worked, and yet somehow this is where we are.
I mean, it wasn't even like he was killed by a super cool, superhuman being with like, powers. It was just he was killed by a mob.
Exactly. And I made him a character. His name was Randy, and he did it. It was just a Tuesday. It was his work shift, and But at the end, the reviews were basically everyone was mad at me because I wasn't hard enough on religion and I wasn't hard enough on secularism. I just made it a very
Yeah.
human, practical thing. And so I ended all religious conflict to unite in being upset with me.
It reminds me of a lot of the Protestant criticisms of Queen Elizabeth during her reign,
Oh, I'm
where
on the right podcast.
but I think about this a lot about how she was pretty anti-Catholic, I would say. But
Oh, yeah.
for the Protestants, they're like she got criticized as being too popish quite
Right?
frequently, which to me is very funny. And it just reminds me that whenever you're dealing with religion, whether you're critiquing it or whether you're reinforcing it, it's never going to be enough. Like you're never going to
Yeah.
be criticizing it enough, or you're never going to be reinforcing it enough to make everybody happy.
Like Tolkien and C.S. Lewis. Tolkien eventually converted C.S. Lewis to Christianity, but not Catholicism. He only made it to Anglican. And it's just like, well, you kind of believe in God, but you're an
But we'll put you on
Anglican.
easy mode.
Yeah, exactly.
Speaking of religion and various degrees of it, tell me about the cult in your TV show. What's their deal?
Well, I specifically essentially made it united. I took a little bit of everybody. I wanted to make up a whole new one, kind of like the way Kurt Vonnegut will kind of talk about religion, but I wanted no one specific because it's all mostly the same tenets. And also if you study like mythology and all that, it's all the same stories intertwined. There's specific beats that you hit. And that way no one's too mad. There's a child in there, which always use the child as like the way to ask the simplest, most direct questions. And no one can get mad at the child.
But by the child, do you mean like specifically that there's a child involved in the mythology of the cult, or there's just a child character who's there to be like, why?
Well, kind of both. There's a child who is in the cast of characters who becomes intertwined later on, if there was a later on.
Speaking of later on, what is your dream arc for this series? Like, how long would it last? Would it last kind of several seasons, on and on and on? Or would you have a set, like, it's going to be 4 seasons, here's the overall storyline, here's where I see it ending?
I mean, if someone were to go, I could make it longer, but if I'm living on borrowed time and I just had to pick a number, I'd say 3 seasons is fine.
Okay, but let's say I'm a producer, which wouldn't that be a beautiful world? So your show's getting made. I love it. What is your dream for this show? How can you tell the best story possible? How many seasons do you need?
You know what? I'm going to say 4 because my instinct is to say 6.
Interesting.
But then I'm just like, though that could also be lazy writing. Like we could also just get to it.
Okay. So like a good pace would be 4.
Yeah, exactly. And like, if you want me to explain that more, I could do a whole rant on why I didn't like WandaVision. But I don't know if it's also that type of conversation you want to have. Because I used to work as a script editor for years. So this can get way too technical for you.
We're definitely going to have that WandaVision conversation. Perhaps not right now, but it is one that I'm very interested in hearing. So 4 seasons. Do you have an idea of where you'd want it to end? Or is it more... because it hasn't been made yet, it's still like the premise and the beginnings and the first couple episodes?
I mean, I was thinking about this for a while, obviously, and I was thinking about how to do the dark but uplifting and not get too cynical, like not let myself get too cynical with it. And I think that the apocalypse does happen.
Okay.
But everyone's okay with it. Like it's less of an apocalypse and more of an epoch an eon, sorry.
So it's more like
in the original biblical sense.
I keep talking over you. I'm a terrible host.
No, that's okay. No, I just mean it would be an eon in the fact that like everyone during COVID-19 was saying like, oh, this is the apocalypse. This is the apocalypse. I'm like, this is more of an eon. Like I could see our civilization dying out, but nature's not going anywhere. Something just happens after us. Like, yeah,
we're very self-centered, and that we use the term apocalypse to just mean like us ending. Because I don't think anyone who was calling it the apocalypse was also saying, well, nature's also going to die. Because there was sort of the understanding that if we go, then, that would be probably better for nature in the long run. People were still saying apocalypse.
See, and that's why with all the like recycling and it sounds weird to say recycling propaganda. Like it is.
I'm with you on this. Let's
Yeah,
keep going.
I believe in recycling. I want the earth to live, but it's less that I think if they had marketed it to selfish people to be like, no, save us. The earth is going to be fine.
Exactly.
The earth reboots
there will
itself.
always be trees, but there won't always be you. So
yeah, there won't always be like oil spills and fossil fuel factory burn off and freon kind of a thing. And like the story of Noah, that is an eon right there. Is the entire population of the earth starts over. It's not even the first time it's happened. I'm using air quotes for everyone that can't see, but
you hear to hear, folks. Andrew Lizotte is saying that the Noah story was factual, literally happened exactly as it was written.
Exactly. The unicorns couldn't fit onto the dinosaur, couldn't get its head in the boat. And that's why they all.
But Noah could fit every kind of mosquito.
Exactly. And again, every religion, every culture has its own flood story. So that's just a thing you can borrow and take and whatnot. But yeah, so I think the world would end, but I think everyone would be okay with it. They'd be emotionally prepared for death in a very healthy way.
I really like that. And
Yeah.
as a story, that's very, how do you say, where you have, like, that's a big goal to have as a writer, because that is a hard place to get to. And I feel like with how society is nowadays, it's something perhaps that we all need.
Yeah. Who wouldn't just set a bunch of lawn chairs up on a really nice hill and watch the comet come towards us and just, enjoy a sunset?
Yeah. I'm gonna be sponsoring this TV show because I need it to happen. I need to be okay with death.
Oh, don't do it, because there's a whole art history aspect to it too. So I'm really making sure no one relates to it.
Oh no, let's talk about that, because my next question was going to be, let's talk about the aesthetics. Or are we thinking of different things entirely? Because I'm like, what is the cult wearing? What are the robes? What is the Afghan flowy robe situation? And you're thinking more of like a intellectual art history thing. I get it. Fine. I'm lowbrow.
We can answer both. There was specifically going to be an episode that was all about rebranding the cult. That was basically just like a fashion makeover, because the red robes, they're heavy. They get hot. They don't breathe. See, and this is where I have, because you want cotton, you want to breathe, but there's, what's that type of fabric that starts with linen? Linen breathes, but you can't clean it. Like, it's just gonna wrinkle, and you can't iron it. It's like dry clean every time.
You need to get a steamer.
Yeah.
And those are hard to come by. But also a fun Canadian twist, and this is me just jumping on your idea and taking over. So I'm
please
sorry.
do.
But if he's from a small Canadian town, then they'd need those robes to be warm. I feel like a cult in the wintertime in Canada would be tricky, because those things have got to withstand. Like, you can't just throw a winter jacket over your cult robes.
This
right?
is why it's a whole episode.
That's disrespectful.
It's a whole episode. So again, like that kind of corner gas feel, a little bit existentialist, like Waiting for Godot, like just too empty alone in a field. But the main character I based loosely off the artist William Kurlick. Do you know who I'm talking about?
I know who you're talking about. He's one of my favorites. Also another guy who was like weird with religion.
Yeah.
A late in life convert to Roman Catholicism. He was Ukrainian. I believe he was raised Ukrainian Orthodox.
Yes, I think so. This is bad of me, because he's from Manitoba. He should have been in the group of 7. It's a little weird. Without giving too much away, he's Norman Rockwell that turned into Hieronymus Bosch.
He's probably my favorite Canadian artist, I'm going to say. Probably because he also illustrated children's books, or one children's book in particular that I grew up with. And so that was my introduction to him. And then as an adult, when I discovered his other artwork, it had that cozy feeling, but also that kind of weirdness that his art has.
So for those that don't know, he essentially started out painting like charming Canadian landscapes and stuff like that. And then we get into the 80s with the whole like Cold War standoff nuclear bomb thing. And he also develops schizophrenia. And like, let's be honest, he was painting in an unventilated shack, and he was working with all these acrylics, and he was essentially like huffing paint all
Yeah.
day. And much like Salvador Dali, who used to shoot heroin in a room of broken glass and paint what he saw, he started to think that what he was seeing was visions of the future. And he started to paint these abstract hellscapes, again, up there with Dali, Hieronymus Bosch, William Blake, kind of a thing. And then he starts to run out of money because his fan base was the Norman Rockwell, like they liked the tchotchkes and the quaint little homes.
They wanted
So
to
he
see the
needed money.
sleds and the snowy hills and the ice skating. Yep.
Yeah, exactly. And so his manager's just like, you gotta go back to like the old, everyone's gotta eat. So he starts painting these landscapes, but he'll hide like mushroom clouds in the background. Like he started hiding the hellscape stuff really interestingly. And it's a thing that he battled with his whole life, is the like, is this real? Am I getting these visions, or am I going crazy? You know, and a whole thing of belief versus faith. So yeah, the character is not William Kurlick, but I kind of took that seed. I love that arc.
Yeah.
And so there's a lot of that thrown into the like the prairie landscape, because there is something scary about isolation that I think that people don't use enough to the advantage.
Oh, and absolutely on the prairies, because I've done the cross Canada road trip a couple times, and just the vastness of the plains. I remember driving through and thinking to myself, the sky's too big. This is too much sky. It's too much. I as a person cannot take all this in all at once. I can't digest this properly.
And
I found
there's
it
so
kind
many
of frightening.
different colors in a prairie sunset that I didn't realize when people used to say that stuff until I moved to Ontario. And I'm like, it's missing colors. Suddenly I can't see the northern lights. I'm like, that's weird. So there is all those weird colors and things that I think people don't use and don't associate, that there's a chance to.
How non-mundane urban, like rural life is, I think. When you think of a prairie, they're like, oh, that's pretty boring. You know, you got a field in the sky. But then you don't realize the magnitude of it and the variance in, like you said, colors in the sky and just like the clouds. I remember being so overwhelmed just by clouds in the sky, which again sounds ridiculous, but it's true.
And it's the perfect metaphor for the town too, because people think of boring and mundane, but if you leave people that unchecked with that much freedom, there is room for eccentricity to grow and be accepted. Whereas if you're living in a metropolis, in a community, there's all kinds of things to keep you in track. Like everybody is involved in everyone else's business. Whereas that is not the mentality in small towns.
What? In small towns, everyone knows everyone else's business.
Yes, but they'll also let them do their own thing. Like, they will know you are making moonshine, which I'm not just saying that. It's like a stereotype of small towns. Shout out to Selkirk, Manitoba. But they'll go like, did you know that Frank is making moonshine? Oh! And then you just go back to whatever you were doing, and you just know that Frank is making motionshine. Like, the craziness gets a space to spread.
Yeah, there aren't any secrets in a small town, but there isn't a lot of shame either.
No.
There's a lot of like, oh yeah, he's the town weirdo and he does this and that.
And that's sort of what I feel like whenever somebody gets put on the news or something in a libertarian rant where it's like, the government should stay away from me. I feel like people who actually believe that would be watching going like, shut up, why are you on TV? They're going to find us now, and they know we do that thing. Shut up about it. It's like all those people protesting that they're like, we're doing secret shows now during COVID. And you're like, shut, not anymore. Now we all know.
So the town in your show would be from Saskatchewan then, or because Manitoba is very foresty and lakey.
Well, every province has like a crystal lake, a small town called Crystal Lake. So I was figuring I would do kind of like a Springfield type thing.
Gotcha.
Where it could be anywhere in the country. If we shot, it would definitely be in the prairies. I mean, in my head, I'm thinking of like Carmen, Manitoba, Inglis, Verdun, just
Someone
one of
from
those
English is
towns.
listening to this and being like, "Oh my gosh!"
Yeah, I'm shouting out all the big names. But like when my great grandmother died, she was 101. Again, the funeral where everyone's like, I don't feel like. I think the pastor even said like, I don't think anyone feels bad. How many of us are going to make it to? Actually, she was 104 when she died. So it's just like,
Wow.
yeah, yeah. And
Kind of like going
so
to the marriage of someone who like they've been living together for 5 years, where you're there and you're like, "Well, we knew this was coming."
exactly. But it's also one of those towns where it's like the church is like right beside the community center, and there's a hotel and one diner, and that's kind of it. And they're like, that's all we need, and you can see it all out any front door.
But again,
Yeah.
your background is theater. Am I correct? Because you mentioned doing plays and
Yes.
things like that.
Well, here's the thing. I didn't get into to theater until I got my first TV pitch, and I didn't know how to
Okay.
write that.
So not what I was thinking at all. Because I was going to say my background is theater more than film. So that kind of set of the town with the church and the grocery store and the post office and whatever is very theatrical, and that it is
And it's
nice
the
having an area
Canadian
where like all the
stereotype,
drama happens. Yeah.
the prairie kitchen play. That's again, I was a script editor in a playwrights guild for 5 or 6 years. The amount of plays that I had to read that were all like interior prairie kitchen day.
So Canadian.
So I wanted to do like, let's do that, but like actually make it exciting. Like in the apocalypse. Like it was.
So this is definitely an apocalypse cult then, not like a cult of charisma.
Well, it's more of a
Not like a sex cult.
revelations. Yeah, it's that kind of a thing. It's we're all and see that's another whole aspect of it that I wanted to get into, where suddenly this painter that's having the visions and the guy running the cult had to decide like, okay, so it actually is happening. Do we want the apocalypse to happen because then we all go to heaven, or are we supposed to prevent the apocalypse from happening because that's the good thing? Because that's another huge thing that was fascinating to me as a kid. Is it just like, and I think like watching American news and the politicians that profess to be right wing conservative Christian, some of the ways they rule, I'm like, are you trying to start the apocalypse? Is that part of what it is? Or are we preventing it? Or
Many American high up religious is it evangelicals? But I learned this through learning about like Israel and Palestine, which we're not going to go into because I feel like that would just be the death.
are you going to bring up the oil pipeline borders? Because that's my favorite conspiracy theory of all time.
I mean, I wasn't. We can still talk about it, but I was
Okay.
just gonna mention very briefly that a lot of high up religious leaders in the States are doing things that they know are detrimental, and they're trying to do them because they're detrimental because they want to cause the end of the world because they believe then they'll be raptured up to heaven. Which suddenly makes a lot of policy in the US make a lot of sense when you realize that these people actually don't care about helping people or actually being good Christian people. They're just like, let's wrap it up. Let's get to the end.
Yeah, it's
Let's make
I
it
don't
so
have to do
bad.
anything now because I'm going to heaven. Heaven is where it all starts, which is a
Yeah.
real mentality that I grew up around. And like, I don't know if do you know who Jack Van Impe is?
I do not, but what a name.
This is a show that my dad used to watch all the time called It's a New Day, something like that. But what it was is it was almost like the Daily Show for religion without the comedy, but they just went through the weekly news, and they would point out and connect how it was all drawing similarities to what was talked about in Revelations. And so this guy would be so excited every week. Him and his wife Roxella would be like, and we're almost there. We're almost at the finish line. And my dad would watch this and he would enjoy it. And me and my mom would be like, I don't want the apocalypse.
What a terrifying thing to listen to as a child.
Yeah.
Just like countdown to the apocalypse. And so, did you say his wife's name was Roxella?
Roxella, yes, and she had the big 80s blowout hair, and it was you got certain like donation prizes if you hit certain tiers and stuff. Just that old
What,
classic
what were you donating
televangelist,
to?
the church. You were keeping the lights on in that news
Oh, right,
studio.
right. Jack Van Impe and Roxella.
Yeah.
What a duo. The
I
the the like the televangelist's wife is a genre of person that is so fascinating to me and also so aesthetically such a strong point of view, with like
and
the makeup and the hair and the crying and the mascara running and the
Well, and to bring it back to Sopranos, like it's almost like it's the opposite side of the same coin. It's that like that's Carmela Soprano in another life. It's the same hair. It's the exact same hair. But I do really enjoy that whole like two people having to decide like we should probably stop the apocalypse from happening and like having to have that debate.
it's like when the dog has finally caught the car.
Yes,
The
exactly.
apocalypse
What do you
cult
do with
finally
it?
confronted with the apocalypse and they're like, well, what now?
And then it becomes like, okay, we have to do small acts of kindness. We have to like throw the apocalypse off balance. So it's very dark subject matter, but with a more positive viewpoint.
Okay, when you introduced the premise, I was thinking more along the lines, and I'm not saying that this is better because I very much enjoy the trip I'm being taken on
Mm-hmm.
with this story, but I just assumed that it would be the guy goes back to his hometown, everyone is in a cult, and then he has to get everyone out of the cult somehow. Like he has to defeat the cult. But you're saying that he's working with the cult
Mm-hmm.
to help stop the apocalypse.
I don't think the cult is necessarily a bad thing as long as
I
it's.
like that.
See, because again, I studied a lot of theology and stuff like that. And something that we've gotten away from is the church only used to be considered like a community center. The show, by the way, is called Scapegoat. Basically, what it used to be is baptizing someone used to be this person is now in the community and they're taking the oath to a religious journey and they're going to go off on their own journey and then they're going to come back to us and they're going to share what they learned. And it was more sort of like church was a little bit more like, and what did we all learn this week? Kind of a thing, because it was just you out in the middle of the woods and it was all about survival and stuff in this community. And I find it so much more interesting that we're both comedians. We know a lot of people who have been through AA and various programs.
Yeah.
But it's sort of like they all profess that like AA often gets called the most religious experience of their lives because it's just people talking about what they learned, admitting that they need help in a basement with bad coffee. And I think that part of it is good. That part of it. And in the same way that like Joseph Campbell and Carl Jung were just like, there's only this amount of stories. It's all about breaking out of denial, ego death, rebirth, and enlightenment. And that goes into the 5 stages of grief, the 12 stages of ACA, the AA, or any of the A's. Yeah, it's all the same pattern. And you can replicate that. So I don't think religion is necessarily bad. I think that religion is only bad if the person pushing it has bad intentions. It's kind of carbon neutral.
Yeah, I think we're on the same page in that regard. And I definitely agree about the community aspect, the communal aspect of religion. Because a lot of people are like, oh, religion was created so that one guy could lord over everyone else and all this stuff. But really, it's kind of like, you have a bunch of people and they're on their own in a scary land and they're banding together and trying to like stick together and help each other out and find hope and all that sort of
right
thing. I feel like you said it much more eloquently than I did, and I'm just kind of mirroring.
Well, I wrote a whole pitch about it, so yeah. Oh shoot, was it? And the main character coming into it, like he's coming off of addiction. He's essentially sent home for like house arrest. He's not dealing with a bunch of mental health problems. Like he's going to start off fighting the cult, but he almost needs the cult just as much as the cult needs him. Like they're both not right and they're both not wrong. There is no bad guy. I'm much more interested in stories where there isn't actually a bad guy.
Again, this completely subverts my expectations of what I thought the story was going to be. Because again, when we hear cult, we're so used to being like, oh, they're the baddies. Easy.
Yeah, but every Christianity was called a kitchen cult or a mystery cult. Like every religion is technically a cult until it gains enough traction. I mean, are we still allowed to call Scientology a cult?
Scientology is technically, isn't it a philosophy or it's like a medical practice? Like
Right,
they're
and
all
they're tax exempt
psychiatrists
too,
or
I
whatever.
think.
Yeah. I
But
we'll go to
that
later in
started
uni for
within our
that,
own
but
lifetimes.
yeah, and I mean, also someone who studied classics, the term cult has changed a lot in terms of connotation. Back in the Roman times, the word cults was used to describe a lot of things, and it didn't have the same connotations. It was just all it meant was, I think it just meant like anything other than the mainstream religion, like anything that wasn't like Jupiter.
Right. And
But I
it's
could be
also
misremembering.
that's why the title of the thing is Scapegoat, because there's a section of the Bible that no one really talks about, which is a scapegoat was you're in the church, you're in the community, and they decide like this one person is corrupting the entire community and we have to get rid of them. You would tie that person up to the like a post and you would leave them on the edge of town, and then a demon who I believe is I can text you later with the actual Bible verse, but it's a demon called like Azazel would come and like
That sounds like
feast
a demon name.
and eat the person. And that's how we eventually got to like still like run him out of town on a rail. Like it's the same thing. They just didn't think it was a demon. They thought they were leaving a person tied up to a post to die on the outskirts. Like it's
Would they come back? Because we know that a demon wasn't actually eating the person. Would they go to pick up the person, a week later and then they just died of hunger? Or was it kind of metaphorical where it was like we tie them up, the demon eats the bad parts of them?
When it became a metaphor, they would tie up a goat, scapegoat, to cleanse the sin. But like if you just leave a goat out in the wilderness tied up, it's going to get eaten by a wolf or a lion or something. And then when you come back, you're going to be like, it was a demon.
It was Azazel.
Yeah.
But then that's kind of dark because then the origins of that are that you would actually tie up a person. So basically they were tying a person and a wolf would eat the person.
Yes. Yeah, it's all going to be dark. Whenever a Christian group is just like, I'm being oppressed, I'm like, really? Because we used to get thrown to lions and now we have iPhones. So I think we're fine, relatively.
A lot of time has passed.
Yeah.
Well, now I'm sad that didn't get made.
Well, thank you.
Which I guess is the point of the podcast, to make everyone feel sad that these things didn't get made.
Well, thank you. And now I'm just like, you know what? It was good that I'm saying it out loud. I'm like, I liked that. I wanted that to get made. And it was kind of the most me thing I'd ever written, because I could write a straight comedy, but this is, every character was a little bit me and the subject matter was very me. And it's but I find that you're gonna get rejected so many times, so write it for you. Like, by the time I had finished the pilot of that, it was so healing in like just things I needed to say and get off of my chest.
Oh, 100%.
If it didn't get made, good, I got my part out of it.
I completely agree with that, and I relate to that so hard. One of the first pilots that I wrote was autobiographical. I was talking about how I couldn't relate to anything on TV, and someone was like, well, just write your own thing. So I did, and obviously it never got made, but it was just like about a single mom escaping from an abusive relationship and dealing with finding her own identity after that. And sometimes when I'm feeling down, I'll reread, because I wrote a couple episodes of that. And I'll be like, you know what? It doesn't even matter that it didn't get made, because it just feels so good that I was able to get this out of me.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a weird kind of like exorcism or catharsis. And you don't need to be able to answer the question. You just kind of need to be able to explore it.
I'm gonna wrap this up here because I feel like this is such a nice place to end this discussion.
Yeah, there was a nice little bow on it.
Let's do like a lightning round of things that you want to quickly mention about this show that you're excited about, that you like your favorite things, and then we'll wrap it up.
My favorite thing was that I knew that the pastor's wife was eventually going to end up in control of the church. And I just liked exploring, like, what if women ran a religion? What would that look like if it was a matriarchal head?
I feel like that would be a real crowd pleaser. And like we said, the pastor's wife, evangelical's wife, is a genre of person that is fascinating.
Yeah. And also, side note, I don't think that the pastor's wife or pastor himself, he didn't want it. He didn't enjoy being it. And I think he would almost enjoy more being in the maternal role.
That's a dynamic that I would like to see explored.
Which is also very me. Like, I have no problem with the I am okay being Mr. Mom in a relationship. If we had that, I am okay being the full-time dad and writing during the day and like cooking the meals and stuff. If I'll be kept. If there's any millionaire S's out there, I'm willing to be kept.
You heard it here, ladies.
Yeah.
All right. That's it for us. Anyone listening to this, go and give Andrew's podcast a listen. It is called...
Oh, it's called Punch Up Your Life.
Thank you so much for coming on, Andrew. You can find Andrew's podcast, Punch Up Your Life, wherever podcasts are available. Is there anything else you'd like to plug while you're here?
I'm just at Thin Lizotte, Lizotte, on all of the social media. And hopefully Stupid Fancy comes back monthly to Comedy Bar in Toronto. Yeah, that's pretty much it.
Excellent. Thank you guys so much for tuning in to Rejects, and have a great day.